Hey, it's Robert Schwimmer and welcome to my channel where we explore above and below the sea and from the air. Today I'm in Gaviota, which is just west of the city of Santa Barbara. Behind me is the nice calm Santa Barbara Channel, which is usually near shore. Calm, it's in the shadow of the northwest winds that tend to wrap around Point Conception, also known as the Cape Horn of the Pacific. Recently, I was doing some research, going through some old U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey charts from the late 19th century and came across two charts that had these speed trial runs and courses and speed for the USS San Francisco and USS Olympia. And Olympia piqued my interest because that was Commodore George Dewey's flagship at the Battle of Manila Bay in 1898. And I did a story on one of the other ships that was also part of his flotilla there, and that was the revenue cutter McKinley, which ironically sunk in a collision right off Point Conception to the west of me. And I've actually did a video on that discovery, which I will link here. But also on these charts had range poles. And that also piqued my interest because I wanted to know more about the importance of those poles in the course and speed. And I've done a little bit more research, and there were more U.S. Navy ships doing the speed trials here, and why this location and where were these ships built. So we're going to take a dive into that. So let's get ready to go explore the search for speed in the Santa Barbara Channel. The United States Navy's legacy in the Santa Barbara region began in the 19th century. Navy ships came to Santa Barbara on official business or incidental visitors. The officers and sailors often enjoyed leave as honored guests of the local community. Early in the 20th century, over 100,000 people infused what was justifiable pride lined the Santa Barbara shore to greet the arrival of the Great White Fleet on April 25, 1908. 16 battleships formed a column of squadrons dropping anchor not more than 1,500 yards offshore. Celebrations followed that included a parade and a dance of the flowers, where a large number of the most beautiful women in Santa Barbara society took part in the festivities. In 1933, the Navy's oldest continuous commission ship, the USS Constitution, of course effectively known as Old Ironsides, made her first and only visit to Santa Barbara. The port of call was part of her national tour, made under tow of the minesweeper USS Grib. In true Santa Barbara tradition, thousands turned out to greet and celebrate the frigate, and boatloads of schoolchildren were able to visit the ship during her stay. Today, the Santa Barbara Navy League continues the tradition of hosting ships, their officers, and sailors. Among these vessels were the aircraft carriers USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Ronald Reagan. The building that houses the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum formerly was the Naval Reserve Building. A short distance from the museum is a small working pier. During World War II, the mix of naval vessels moored at the same pier included 314-foot Clemson-class destroyers. Also worth noting, although not geographically located inside the Santa Barbara Channel, but just north of Point Conception is where the U.S. Navy's worst peacetime disaster occurred with respect to loss of ships, when 7 U.S. Navy destroyers were lost in 1923. I'll put a link here for the Honda Point naval disaster. Back to the topographic charts I discovered. The first chart clearly indicates two different vessels, speed lines as mentioned earlier, the cruisers USS San Francisco and USS Olympia circa 1893. Enlarging the text boxes, we learned that the original chart was for the cruiser USS San Francisco speed trial circa August 1890. with the survey team aboard the U.S. Coast and Geodetic steamer Hassler. Variations of the chart for the speed line for the cruiser USS Olympia survey team aboard the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey steamer Patterson. After reviewing Patterson's vessel logbook, it was determined that she was also on station setting up range markers along with the U.S. Fish Commission steamer Albatross in 1896 for the battleship USS Oregon speed trial on the same course. I found a similar chart that included photos of the USS San Francisco with added images of the USS Olympia. Unfortunately, the tape had yellowed. Also observations of the range markers from Coho Anchorage to Montecito. There's no doubt that the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey scientists team took advantage of survey work conducted by George Davison, formerly with the U.S. Coast Survey, that included verifying latitude and longitude at Coho Anchorage in 1850, as well as locations for new lighthouses that included Point Conception and the Santa Barbara Lighthouse. If you're interested in learning more about the Tale of Two Lighthouses at Point Conception, I will provide a link to the video. Though there's no doubt that the original range poles and light systems no longer exist since they were located on private land. Before I discuss the speed trials, I thought I would revisit these range pole sites just to show how the terrain has changed over 130 years. The original Santa Barbara Lighthouse was destroyed in an earthquake in 1925. Today, a white tower with a light is located near the cliff face. The next location at Hammond's Beach is east of Stearns Wharf in the city of Santa Barbara and now populated by the Bonnie Mead condominium complex. And right next to it is the Coral Casino Beach and Cabana Club, which is close to the Four Seasons Resort, the Biltmore at Santa Barbara. The last location is located at Loon Point, where multi-million-dollar homes line the cliff face. Search for speed in the Santa Barbara Channel. Gentlemen, fire off your boilers. My research has uncovered several U.S. Navy ships built at the Union Iron Works shipyard in San Francisco that had successful speed trials in the Santa Barbara Channel. So I'm only going to report out on one, the battleship USS Oregon. Her early history wrote an important chapter in the U.S. Navy's legacy at Santa Barbara. Oregon was launched at the Union Iron Works on October 26, 1893. After her commissioning in 1896, she was fitted out for the Pacific duty. An Indiana-class battleship, her length was 351.2 feet, her beam was 69.3. Oregon was heavily armed for her time with main battery of 4 13-inch guns and secondary battery 8 8-inch guns. She was to be nicknamed the Bulldog of the Navy, but only after playing a pivotal role early in her naval career. As the USS Oregon neared completion in San Francisco, the U.S. Navy appointed officers to serve as the trial board to make sure Union Iron Works had met the minimum contracted performance requirements. The board was in place to certify that the battleship was seaworthy and able to carry specified loads without undue strain on the hull. Of particular importance would be the ability of the Oregon's power plant to deliver the contracted speed. The contracted stipulated a bonus clause that offered Union Iron Works $25,000 for each additional quarter knot beyond the minimum 15-knot specification. In selecting the location for the speed trial, several factors were of great importance. The course had to be between 30 and 40 miles in length, close to shore, in fairly protected waters of significant depth and away from heavy vessel traffic. The Santa Barbara Channel was chosen, but not only because it met the broad criteria. Earlier, the U.S. Navy's cruisers USS Charleston in 1890, USS San Francisco 1890, USS Olympia 1893, and Coastal Defense Monitor USS Monterey 1893 had all made successful speed trials in the channel. The coastline north of Santa Barbara during this period included landmarks such as lighthouses, wharfs, and windmills. They were all easily discernible from offshore. From observations of these structures, vessels' position could be accurately determined. At intervals about every 10 miles along the coast, the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey established range poles. And we all know about those now. At each location, markings consisting of a pair of range poles set a few hundred yards apart at right angles to the east-west trial course. On board Oregon, the navigation officer could determine the ship's exact position by watching the broad angle between the range poles of one pair until, when the poles were in line, the angle disappeared. The officer could then extend this line until it intersected the course of the battleship. Looking ahead 110 years into the future, all this effort could be simplified with the use of the modern Global Positioning System, GPS. Officers of the trial board were posted on various ships as observers. The varied collection of vessels included the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey steamers Getney and MacArthur, U.S. Fish Commission vessel Albatross, and Mare Island Navy tug Unadilla. Vessels anchored at each end of the 30-mile course as well as various intervals. The observers were also equipped with instruments to measure the strength and direction of tidal and current flow in order to correct those influence when calculating the Oregon's speed over the course. On May 14, 1896, at 0800, USS Oregon, passing offshore of Goleta, completed a warm-up trial at 17.34 knots with corrected adjustments for tidal conditions. On her final trial, although not her best, Oregon averaged 16.4 knots. Oregon's overall 62-mile course result showed 16.791 knots, breaking the speed record for her class of ship. The success of the Battleship speed trial earned Union Iron Works a well-deserved bonus of $175,000. And this is in 1896 dollars. Not unlike today's enthusiastic crowds that turn out for the visiting ships at Santa Barbara, Oregon's speed trial was observed by hundreds of spectators who lined the coast from Refugio to Moores Mesa. Contemporary accounts describe the battleship plowing through the Pacific Ocean, showing smoke belching from her funnels and a bone in her teeth. The Santa Barbara Channel proved to be very successful testing grounds for Navy ships built by Union Iron Works. Future speed trials by battleships USS Wisconsin in 1901 and USS Ohio in 1904 and armored cruiser USS California in 1906 were also enjoyed by the Santa Barbara residents. USS Oregon's speed trial was actually put to test just 2 years later. In 1898, the USS Oregon was in dry dock at Puget Sound Naval Station when news was received of the destruction of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. Speeding to San Francisco, Oregon received official orders directing her to join the U.S. fleet blockading the Spanish naval forces at Havana. Departing San Francisco on March 19th, she raced 14,000 nautical miles. Her record-breaking passage of 66 days included coaling stops in adverse sea conditions. Arriving at Key West, Oregon joined Admiral Sampson's fleet just 2 days later. On June 1st, she assigned to the U.S. Navy blockade at Santiago, Cuba. 34 days later, Admiral Sedavilla Spanish squadron found themselves trapped in the harbor. Their attempt to escape was met with gunfire, first from the USS Oregon, followed by a combined bombardment of firepower from the U.S. Navy ships in the blockade. the Spanish ships facing superior American armament and leadership were soon severely damaged and forced to beach their ships or risk sinking. On July 17th, the Spanish officially surrendered to Admiral Sampson. Fortunately, the USS Olympia has survived as a floating museum ship at the Independent Seaport Museum in Philadelphia. In Portland, Oregon, there's a USS Oregon Memorial where the ship's mast is on display at a waterfront park. Well, I sure hope you enjoyed exploring the search for speed in the Santa Barbara Channel. I would like to thank my loyal subscribers, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, leave a comment. You know, that helps the channel get exposure. And if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing, where we explore above and below the sea and from the air. Thank you.